My clock's ticking, so I'm going to get started. I'm Luke Darcy, I'm with Sigfox. Sigfox is a network operator for the Internet of Things, and our mission is to build a global network for the IoT. We're founded in 2010 in Toulouse, France, and we've still got our main base there with around 60 people. We've raised a couple of rounds of funding, in total about $32 million. Our principal investor is Intel Capital. Progress so far, we've got a patent-protected wireless networking system that we're using in the networks that we're installing, and we're also working with XE to get some standardization in that. We've installed networks that cover the whole of France, the whole of Spain. We're working on the UK, and we've got the whole of the Netherlands covered. And in countries where we operate, our networks typically have much better indoor and outdoor coverage than any cellular network. So that statement might sound crazy because we're a 60-person startup, and we've raised $32 million. How have we got nationwide coverage in 4 European countries already? And we haven't discovered the wireless networking holy grail. We've just made different compromises to everyone else, and we're doing this through the power of slow networking. Now, slow networking sounds like a strange goal because fast is better, right? Well, not always. Faster is definitely better for human communications, and the network operators tend to be focused on their most profitable customers, who are people with smartphones. And so as a result, cellular technology has been becoming faster and more power hungry and more smartphone specialized over the last few generations. And we're getting to the point now where your smartphone really works very well with broadband. But there are costs to pay for that, and one of the primary costs is power consumption. The cost of the device also increases, and that makes cellular technology less and less suitable for the IoT, where you typically care more about power consumption and the price of putting a technology into a device. So it's kind of a classic disruptive innovation situation where the existing players are focusing on their most profitable customers, and that creates an opportunity for Sigfox to come in with a technology that's tailored for the IoT, where low bandwidth connections are much more important. So how does it work? Well, as I mentioned before, we are a network operator, so we go in and install networks in different locations. That's usually very expensive. We can do it much more cheaply than traditional cellular operators because our technology allows a single base station to cover a huge area. The longest range we've ever achieved from one of our base stations is 600 kilometers from a low power device to the base station. That's not typical, but even in cities, a single base station will tend to cover a range of, say, around 5 to 10 kilometers within your coverage. And that means that, say, in France, for example, we've set up a network that has 30 times fewer base stations than any of the cellular operators and still gets better coverage. You couldn't surf the internet on it or watch a YouTube video, it's much too slow for that. But in terms of getting smoke detectors and other high-volume IoT products connected, it works really well. And we've got millions of connections on there already. As far as the device makers is concerned, then they simply go out to existing chip vendors that we've certified, and we have partners, chip vendor partners, including TI and Apnal and several other companies. And they buy the chip, and then they can run some firmware on it that allows to connect to our network. So we're not making chips ourselves. There's a merchant market for them. And that means that there's a competitive, low-cost pricing for devices. Okay, so just run quickly through our differentiators. We have extremely low energy consumption. Means a smoke detector, for example, can last for 8 years on a single primary cell. Very low connectivity pricing, sub $1 per year per device for high-volume customers. Hardware cost is very low because we've got a competitive merchant market of chips available, so high-volume customers can add the technology for less than $2. And it's on-demand activation with no pairing. Okay, so finally, with 5 seconds left, here's a slide of some of the customers we already have. We have around 5 million connections on our backlog in Europe right now. Any questions?
you driving device proliferation?
Sorry?
How are you driving device proliferation?
So do you mean how we're encouraging device makers to
Yes.
put out products? So in a couple of ways. I think the most important part that we can play in that is by setting up networks that allow device makers to easily add connectivity to their devices without destroying the financial or technical viability of the product. You know, a coffee machine with a wireless connectivity in it that reorders your Nespresso capsules automatically when you run out, I think is quite a nice product, for example. But the bill of materials of the total coffee machine is probably about $20. So doing that with a 3G modem doesn't make any sense because a 3G modem would probably cost $20 as well. Doing it with a Sigfox radio, where you can add the technology for $2, starts to look like an attractive thing. So we're encouraging it from that point of view. I think that's the part we can play, but we're really surfing a bigger trend of IoT. You know, there are lots of things happening there, and we should benefit from that growth.
Can you talk a little bit about your IP? And so what are some of the unique claims that you're making on the IP side?
So a lot of what we're doing on the wireless side is in connection with very narrow RF channels. So, you know, people talk about broadband connectivity, and, you know, obviously that's good if you're trying to surf the internet. But we've developed a technology that uses very, very narrow channels. And there's a lot of smarts that go into dealing with that, particularly on the base station side. And so our IP is connected with how you actually deal with millions of devices connected using narrow channels on base stations.
What application are you most personally interested in the next year or two to drive uptake?
That's an interesting question. So I can see a couple that we're really seeing big uptake in. And you know, this isn't just a projection, this is what our network's being used for in Europe, we've got nationwide networks. One is in security, generally, so things like connected smoke detectors, connected alarm systems. And then another is in tracking. So, you know, I think tracking generally is tracking dogs, tracking kids, tracking Alzheimer's patients, tracking your luggage, tracking packages. There are all sorts of different verticals in tracking, but they all need the same thing, which is a really low-cost, low-power tag that has GPS and a wide area network technology in, and has battery life measured in months, not days. And I think we can do that.
You are showing major customers, so mobile carriers, telecom carriers behind these customers, mobile carriers support.
So we're not using. We have our own network.
Oh.
We're not actually piggybacking on any existing network. We go in and when we want to operate in a new area, we'll actually go in and install base stations. Now, usually that's a completely crazy strategy for a startup company. The reason why it works for us is because we need between 30 and 100 times fewer base stations to get our network up and running. And that's it's not because we're doing any magic, it's simply because we've decided we're only interested in very slow networking connections. And that means that we don't need the huge proliferation of base stations that other people do.
Luke, do you guys have a demo table over in the pavilion?
We don't, but I'm at the show and I'm happy to talk to anyone who's interested in finding out more.
All right. Thank you very much.